If I were to ask you what the TV shows Reign, The Serpent Queen, and The King's Mistress had in common, would you be able to tell me? No? What about Nostradamus, Diane, or Selene: A Violent Life? You might not be able to tell me what all of those pieces of cinema have in common, but I can. And the one thing, one person, one entity that they have in common is Diane de Poitiers. While her exact birth date is largely debated, I will be using the Encyclopedia Britannica's determination as to her birth year. Diane de Poitiers was born in 1499. She came to the French court to be a lady-in-waiting to Louise of Savoy, who was now the Dowager Queen of France. However, in 1531, Diane de Poitiers, at the age of 32, would transition from the role of lady-in-waiting to royal mistress to the then prince and grandson of her benefactor, Louise of Savoy, Henri of France. Henri was 12 and Diane was 32. Despite their very large and very troubling age gap, she would become queen in all but name during Henri's reign. She was heavily favored and a larger public figure than that of Henri's wife, Catherine de Medici. During Henry's lifetime, she was gifted the royal residence of, please forgive my pronunciation, I took Spanish, not French, Chenonceau. However, upon his death, Henri's wife, Catherine de Medici, forced Diane to move from Chenonceau to Catherine's privately owned Chateau de Chaumont. However, Diane would only stay at the chateau on rare occasions. She was also forced, after Henri's death, to return much of the collection of crown jewels that she'd acquired via gifts from Henri during his life. So why are we talking about Diane de Poitiers? Diane de Poitiers is a figure who looms very large in any historical drama surrounding French court, typically in the time of Henri II or Henri II's eldest son in the case of Reign. Diane was an imposing figure at court, to be sure. He was the person that the king trusted implicitly, who the king was madly in love with. My issue, and I think a lot of people's issue with her portrayal now in the year 2026, is the portrayal of Diane as the other woman, the love interest, one of the points of a love triangle between Catherine de Medici, Henri II, and herself. And a lot of people's primary issue, justifiably so I believe, is that Diane was 20 years Henri's senior at the start of their official relationship when he was 12 years old. Diane had been a fixture at court for years prior and would have witnessed the prince transitioning into this prepubescent phase of his life wherein she became his mistress. And I think a lot of us can agree and should agree that without a doubt, Henri II of France was most definitely a victim of grooming by Diane. And yes, we can wave off the fact that, well, come on now, it was 1531. This is just the way the world was. There were girls getting married younger than that to men that are 3 times their age. So what's the problem? The problem is that we often see Henri aged up in modern day portrayals of Diane. And I want to break this down by specifically the television appearances of Diane de Poitiers that I listed at the beginning of the episode, because I really think that that sheds a light on how she's treated and how she is handled publicly. And I know it's Women's History Month and it almost feels like sacrilege to do this, but I would also like to parallel Diane de Poitiers' portrayal in these shows to, say, Henry VIII's portrayal in television, and just see how vastly different those two people are and have been treated. So we are going to begin our analysis of the modern day portrayal of Diane de Poitiers with perhaps the most egregiously inaccurate portrayal of Diane de Poitiers to exist in the television medium. And it comes as no surprise to any lover of period drama shows and historical dramas that the offender in question is the CW's Reign. The time frame in which Reign aired with Diane as either a series regular or recurring character was a 2-year span from 2013 to 2015. Within the show, we have established Henri as a man who is well into his 40s, give or take. And we not only see him as an older character, but the actress portraying Diane does look younger than Henri II. Oh, it is very worth noting that everybody takes Reign with a pinch of salt, because in the end, the reason that Diane de Poitiers' character is written out of Reign is not because of the death of Henri II. It's because of her ties to paganism and witchcraft, none of which we had any historical evidence of. It was definitely just a CW trope and CW ploy for drama and intrigue into the show. It's not uncommon with their shows. We know this. We shake our heads and we move on. However, Diane is sort of portrayed as a villain in this show, which is an intriguing sort of proposition, because I believe, and I think that a lot of people would agree, that we should view Diane de Poitiers through a villainous lens when analyzing specifically her relationship with Henri II. Another big gripe that many people had with Diane's portrayal in Reign, in addition to the witchcraft and the paganism, was the existence of an entirely new to everyone son that she had with Henri II, named Sebastian, or Bash within the television universe. Diane de Poitiers had 2 children with her husband and helped raise Henri II's illegitimate daughter from another mistress, but never bore any children of Henri II's. So I do take Reign with a grain of salt, because it is just so outlandish that Reign in and of itself has become sort of universally agreed upon that it's a decent show if you watch it as historical fantasy and historical fiction, not as any sort of biographical or based in reality show whatsoever. So one could argue that with everything going on in Reign, from the ghost plotline to murder and Nostradamus and his soothsaying abilities, to changing Mary of Scots' entire age and experience at the French court, I think it's pretty well agreed upon that Reign sort of just is a league of its own, and nothing in Reign should be considered historically accurate. But it is worth mentioning because Henri and Diane's relationship in the show is tumultuous, and his head is easily turned, but at the end of the day, he always goes back to Diane. Diane is the one. Diane is his favorite. Diane is the sun and moon to him, which one could argue, yeah, that's accurate to their dynamic historically. Sure. The issue is that Henri is portrayed as the older person in the relationship. Henri is portrayed as the one with the power in that relationship, when in reality we know that with victims of grooming, the power is entirely in the hands of the perpetrator, regardless of the station or the status of the victim. So, moving swiftly along from Reign and all of its troubles, I want to talk about a mini-series next. It's a French mini-series. It's called The Queen's Favorite. It came out in 2022. It's a limited series. Again, one common theme that we will see in most of these is that Henri is significantly aged up. Henri is sort of seen as a Casanova type playboy. He's got a swagger and a charm that most monarchs at the time were sort of shadowed as having, or that's not the right word, were sort of seen as having, right? If you were a king at the time, it wasn't unheard of, nor would it have been strange or even questioned that you would have a mistress. So in that, sort of sense of like, oh, they get everyone they want, and there's no qualms whatsoever within the royal marriage about this. My issue with The King's Favorite is, again, the aging up of Henri completely changes the context of the relationship, and also, The King's Favorite is a historical romance show. I would almost consider it on par with My Lady Jane, in the sense that, like, yeah, the characters existed, but the story is entirely different. Which in a vacuum is not bad. It wasn't bad in My Lady Jane. I really enjoyed My Lady Jane. But with The King's Favorite, it is entirely romanticizing this relationship as sort of a Romeo and Juliet star-crossed lovers type of thing. And in a way, it kind of was Romeo and Juliet, because Romeo and Juliet also had a very eyebrow-raising age difference. But Romeo and Juliet were not 20 years apart in age. And I cannot express this and stress this enough. Juliet was not 12. Much like Rain, if you take out the historical context of the show, I found it to be a fairly enjoyable historical romance show. If that is your genre, definitely it's intriguing. But again, I just think that if you are so committed to having a historical romance that you want to glamorize and you want to bring to screens, then I do think you have a responsibility to put in the research and put in the effort. And I think that, you know, if you wanted to take a royal mistress, star-crossed lovers route, you could have done that with a lot of Louis XIV's mistresses. Which I know that a lot of people argue, well, that's entirely too overdone. We shouldn't revisit Louis XIV, right? Okay, cool, great. You want to do something different, then do a different French monarch. Do not do a French monarch that was preyed upon by a significantly older party whom had the trust of not only himself, but the adults around him. Pick a different relationship. I think that if it had been any other relationship, The King's Favorite would have easily been a far more enjoyable show for me and for a lot of the fans of historical dramas that really do like and really do appreciate when there is a historical foundation for the premise of the show. Finally, the last historical drama that I want to talk about in the context of Henry and Diane's, or Henri, I think I've been calling him Henri. The last show and drama that I would like to talk about in terms of Henri and Diane's relationship is that of The Serpent Queen, which aired from 2022 to 2024, and was really the first time that I remember stopping and thinking, oh my goodness, I need to Google the ages of both of these individuals involved, because up until that point, Diane had been portrayed as Henri's equal in age and in influence within their relationship. With The Serpent Queen, it was entirely different in the sense that we did see a visual difference in Henri and Diane's ages at the beginning of their relationship. There are aspects of The Serpent Queen, no doubt, that dramatize the age gap even further, but I think that that is almost to the benefit of the show, because it really hammers home the fact that this is not a normal relationship, for lack of a better term. This is not a healthy relationship dynamic, and this really should not be occurring. And this boy was failed by everyone around him when it comes to protecting himself and protecting Henri from Diane. Now, I'm sure that you could listen to this episode and think, well, this is not anything new in history, and men have been marrying younger for centuries. Absolutely, absolutely, yes, they have. And one example that I can think of off the top of my head about that sort of impact and psychological impact on women in history was portrayed in the Starz drama series The White Queen and the White Princess, through the character and historical figure of Margaret Beaufort, who was married to Edmund Tudor at the age of 11 or 12, depending on what source you look at. And the birth of her first and only child was so traumatizing to her that she threw herself into religion. She never had another child. She never wanted to experience that again because of not only the trauma of that birth, but also the trauma of that relationship. And I think that we are so quick to talk about historical dramas and the context surrounding historical relationships when it comes to the male being the older party. Take The Tudors, for example, and the Tudors Showtime TV show, not the Tudor dynasty. That's a whole other episode, whole other discussion. But the television show The Tudors portrayed Henry VIII and Catherine Howard's relationship with a very large age gap, and I don't believe it was expressly stated that she was most likely 17 or younger at the time of their marriage. But I do think that his eldest daughter, Mary, calls it out in the show by sort of insinuating that this girl is younger than she is. What is he doing? There is an acknowledgement within the show, within the canon of the show, which is based on real history and real people, that this is wrong, this was gross, this shouldn't have happened. But it did, and we're showing it to you, but we want you to know that we know it was wrong and it was gross. And often we see Henry VIII being discussed, and people are so quick to jump on Henry VIII and condemn him, rightfully so, for this relationship he had with a teenager when he was in his 50s. But I also would raise the question, why are we not equally as appalled when Diane de Poitiers is portrayed favorably in this relationship that I really don't like to even call a relationship given the nature in which it started, but in this dynamic where she is 20 years his senior and he is 12 years old when this relationship starts. And it is a relationship that endured throughout his entire life. Henri and Diane were together for his entire adulthood, his entire reign, up until his death. Diane was recognized as Henri's mistress. But I do find it very interesting, very concerning, even, that we are so quick to condemn Henry VIII. Any content that has come out surrounding Henry VIII within the past decade or two, we are very quick to say, that was creepy, he married a 17-year-old. That wasn't okay. That was gross. He should be imprisoned for that. If he was alive today, we would put him in jail. We wouldn't even blink. You know, we're so quick to throw stones at Henry VIII, and I cannot say this loud enough and emphasize this enough. I'm not saying that is wrong. I do not want anyone to walk away and say, well, she doesn't think Henry VIII should have been criticized or condemned for marrying a 17-year-old. I do. I think that's, my God, that's awful. So I just want to make sure that is very clear. I am not in any way saying that we should forgive Henry VIII and say, well, that was okay. Because it wasn't. But I do think that it's concerning that as recently as 2022, a new show came out in which Henri and Diane were portrayed as the primary romantic couple that you were supposed to be rooting for. I don't want to root for them. I don't want a show where you are supposed to be rooting for Henri and Diane de Poitiers to get together and live happily ever after. I don't want it. And I don't think it should be made. I think that a different couple could have been picked. I don't like it. I cannot say that enough. I do not like it. And I think that it speaks to a larger issue societally where we have this sort of stigma around male victims. Not sort of. We have a stigma around male victims of this type of abuse. And I do think Diane de Poitiers and Henri II of France's relationship is a glaring signal of that in media and in culture, because why would you make two romantic protagonists in your story be a 12-year-old boy and a 32-year-old woman? You wouldn't. And do you know why you wouldn't do that? Because it's criminal. It is. It's criminal. And the makers of the show know that, and you know that the makers of the show knew that because they aged Henri up. So, was there a scandal around Diane de Poitiers at the time in which she lived? No, there wasn't. I mean, there was as much scandal as a royal mistress could have had, for sure. But there wasn't scandal around Henri having a mistress, right? There just wasn't. It was expected. I dare to say that I think that this should be a scandal brought to the modern lens. And I do think that we should take a second look at any new media that comes out about Henri II and Diane de Poitiers, because I'm tired of seeing this dynamic romanticized and made into a star-crossed lovers protagonist story, because it's not. Diane de Poitiers was a predator. She preyed on Henri II, a 12-year-old boy at the age of 32. That is historical fact. That is not up for a debate. That is not up for discussion. That happened, and she should be portrayed in a similar way to how the Serpent Queen portrayed her. I think that we should see her cast in a more villainous light. And I think she should really only be seen through a villainous light. But I will get off my soapbox and say that if you disagree with me, please let me know in the comments why you disagree. I'd be interested. I would disagree with you, but I'm open to a discussion about whether or not you think that Diane de Poitiers' portrayal in the media is problematic or not, whether you think that we should continue to make Diane de Poitiers and Henri II a love story that is aspirational. That is all I have for you today. And I thank you for joining me as we kick off Women's History Month. I'm sorry that it's being kicked off on such a low note, but I do think that it is important to highlight that a group is not a monolith, and don't worry, we are going to be kicking off next week with a much lighter topic of conversation. I won't spoil that for you, but if Women's History Month is not something you're looking forward to, because all month we will be doing episodes only on historical women, you can check our community tab. I did post a little update about Women's History Month, about the new formatting that we are doing for the episodes, and about what you can expect to see in April. So if you liked this episode and want to see more like it, I invite you to subscribe, give the episode a like, maybe hit the hype button. I don't know if that's an option, and if it is, I don't really know what it does, but if it's there, try it. New episodes will be coming to you every Thursday, and I look forward to seeing you there. But until then, everyone, stay safe and fare thee well. This episode was written and recorded by Elizabeth Parker. All research done was done by Elizabeth Parker. Sound and engineering by Elizabeth Parker. Video formatting and editing by Elizabeth Parker.